Hey, what's up, guys? Today we have the legendary Earthworm with us. Say hello, Earthworm.
Hey,
All right, so we're gonna jump right into it. Some context for those who aren't familiar with Earthworm because he is old. Then he was known as the greatest player in history for a long time. Not so much by the newer crowd, but we'll get more into that later. So let's start out. How did you get started in competitive Pokemon as a whole? Before the Earthworm is the greatest stuff, how did you stumble on the internet and say, I want to battle some other people in Pokemon?
all right. Well, obviously, I got into Pokemon through like getting Red and Blue as a kid, and then I played Pokemon Gold as well. Then eventually got Sapphire and Emerald as well. I think when I had Sapphire version, I was on Game FAQs and reading guides there. Somehow I ended up on the Game FAQs forums, and it was there that I believe somebody was talking about net battle, and they made it sound like, a place where all the good competition is. So being competitive, I obviously wanted to try that out.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I downloaded net battle, started playing on the biggest server there, and got thoroughly trounced over and over and over again, as you would expect.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember who you were playing back then? Any names?
uh, no, it's it's like how many years ago is that? That would be like 15 years ago.
Around that, yeah. If we're talking Ruby and Sapphire, then yes.
Yeah, no, I can remember people that I played, but not right when I started.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm, I used to play with a guy called Hacks Ubers a lot
Mm-hmm.
when I was on NetBattle. He has an account on Smogon called Vulcan Fury, but I'm pretty sure he's been dead for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, so
uh,
you're messing around on Net Battle, and where do we go from there?
yeah, so after getting destroyed quite a lot, I basically just copied what I was losing to. I think people probably still do that these days on the ladder.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I ended up with stuff like, Scumbliss, Dog Trio. Played for quite a while. I think Smogon started like around about when I was playing on Net Battle, but at the time I didn't really know about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know that I played against like staff of Smogon while I was on Net Battle. I remember I played Jumpman 16. I don't know if people even know that name now.
Jumpman, yeah. Jumpman
I played.
16, for those who don't know, which is most, then he was one of the guys who, or maybe just the guy who made the suspect testing process in DPP. Because for the first three generations, it was just kind of like, well, they're the big legendaries, you can't use those. And that's the tiering system. And in Gen 4, then things got more vague with what might not be an Uber with Garchomp and stuff like that. I'll let you talk about that because you lived through that. But Jumpman basically made suspect testing a thing.
Yeah.
And he
Um,
also, sorry, just for more Pokemon nerd history. Then, if you go on the Espeon Smogon analysis page, then I think in GSC and ADV, then like growth or calm mind, depending on the gen, and then sub and baton pass is called SP jump. And I think well, I would assume he had something to do with it. Even like Swords Dance passing Celebi in ADV is called Cele jump for that reason. Anyway, back to you. Sorry.
yeah. Yeah. Other players that I don't know if people would know these days that was staff on Net Battle, so it was a big deal to me at the time. They were Black Leather Jacket, Scarm, and I also played against Chaos, I think,
Mm-hmm.
some ult of his.
Spamming
He beat
Tauros, no
me
doubt.
very badly.
Yeah. So you're playing these guys, and then what happens?
Yeah. So I didn't really accomplish much, but that's how I got started
Hmm.
uh, in competitive Pokemon. Uh, the next like big event for me that kind of changed things, like the trajectory of my Pokemon career, was a shopping center tour that was held in 2005 in Australia called Journey Across Oz.
That's awesome.
So
That's awesome.
I used my I had played like Gen 3 Ubers on Net Battle,
Hmm.
and so I think I had a pretty big edge over the competition there, and I won the whole tournament with like a Swords Dance Groudon plus Blissey plus Calm Mind Barrier Mewtwo.
That sounds unkillable. Mostly the Blissey, because most people don't know what to do when Blissey pops up and they're inexperienced. So, but also
Yeah,
that
plenty of
genius Mewtwo set doesn't get used
plenty
much
of
these days.
Kyogres just sat there trying to beat my Blissey.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
I think there's actually a video on YouTube of me playing in that tournament.
If I find that, I will put it in the description, guaranteed.
I'm very very young in that video. So yeah, that was my first like taste of winning something.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I think that probably influenced my decision to return in 2007 when Shoddy Battle came out.
Hmm.
Yeah, so when that came out, I got like super hooked because of the ladder because there was no ladder in Net Battle, and so that was a really new and novel thing at the time. So I registered like a zillion billion ults to play on the ladder, and one of those was Earthworm, and I got a high rating with that and became my main Smogon nick.
And Earthworm, with that name, then you became known as, by most, the best Gen 4 battler of the generation while it was active. If not the best, then, up there. Like, most modern players will remember things like the period in XY where McMegan and Blue were just 1 and 2, dominating everything. And in Gen 4, it was stuff like Earthworm and Goki, that 1-2 punch. You guys had had a storied rivalry. But in addition
Oh
to
yeah.
that, then there was stuff like the ladder, which had, big name after big name in the top spots. And that
Mm-hmm.
kind of culture was fostered by, the best players were the best on the ladder. So is that how you got your start?
Yep, that's definitely
Mm-hmm.
how it happened. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Take us through that.
I'd say the latter is where I first got recognition from people,
Mm-hmm.
but that was definitely like only the beginning. So I don't think you could get like quite a bit of respect from being high on the ladder at the time because all of the top players were there, as you were saying. But I still think that I didn't have the same level of respect as people like veteran in love who had won 2 Smogon tours already,
Mm-hmm.
or people that were already like household names from the Ruby Sapphire era that were now playing DPP or actually DP.
Yeah, like Husk
Platinum was
and
now
guys like that.
Husk,
Goofball.
Goofball,
Yeah.
uh, Mop,
Mom.
Hitmonlee,
Yeah.
all of those guys,
Yeah.
and then there was also people like Aldaron.
Mm-hmm. What do you remember about the early Diamond and Pearl days other than Garchomp killing everything? Because for any interested readers, then in the RMT archive, then there's. Uh, I don't know how I remember the name of this, but it's called Team Icky Tozen, I think. I don't know what it's from. But it's this
Oh
like
god.
it's this Diamond and Pearl era balance team. It's got Milotic and Celebi and Heatran, and like if you go in there, you read all this awesome stuff like Heatran, grass, water, walling core is overrated, and apparently that was like a big thing at the time. So anyway, take us through early Diamond and Pearl. You know, we hear stories like 70% Hypnosis and Lumberry, Spadef, Metagross, and Garchomp, obviously, Deoxys Speed,
Hmm.
so stuff like that. What was that like?
Yeah, so there were things like Stealth Rock being severely undervalued. Like, it wasn't common at all for Stealth Rock to be on remotely close to every team like it is now.
Mm-hmm.
There was definitely a lot of toxic spikes, though. That was very big.
Mm-hmm.
There was quite a lot of nasty spot Azelf. Infernape was absolutely everywhere because it was like considered the unwallable monster.
Mm-hmm. That's still correct,
Uh,
actually.
that's true.
Mm-hmm.
I think Hippowdon was also really, really popular.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, with all the people coming from RSE, where Tyranitar is king,
Mm-hmm.
really appreciated Hippowdon being there.
Mm-hmm. Especially since Garchomp wasn't good enough, it also had Sandvale on top of it.
Oh, yes, that's true
Yeah.
too. Another another Pokemon, Bronzong
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
was really, really big back then, and Swampert also was much more popular than it came later on.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like has it made like a resurgence recently?
It
I'm not sure. I
has.
think people
It's got a bunch of different sets now, but that's its own thing. But yeah, I remember I wasn't part of the scene at all because I was still under Kappa. But from following along with YouTube, I remember like the Spark Notes in addition of my reading of the history. So you know, initially it was all like Specs, Lucarios before Alderon discovered that Swords Dance was ridiculous.
Oh,
And
that's cute.
yeah, people use Shed Shell Heatran for Doug Trio. They knew what would happen a decade later, stuff like that. Uh, but yeah, so let's segue this into the next question, which is how did you become established as a top player? Because I'm a fan. I'm like Syndrome being a fan of Mr. Incredible. Then I know the big ones. So I remember when I was reading through all the old forums, then it was stuff like best battler of, or OU battler of the year at the Smog Awards, and that was before the beginning of Oceania's World Cup dominance, where you guys won 3 times in a row, and you had several incredibly high stakes wins over some of the best players around. On YouTube, there's a video of Earthworm versus Husk, which was the decider of World Cup 2009, if you guys want to check that out. So take us through your rise from, well, I used to play on Net Battle and now I'm high on the ladder, to, you know, best OU Battler of the Year, winning all these tournaments for Oceania and stuff like that.
Yep. So late 2007, early 2008 was the first like time I really rose to prominence in the tournament scene on Smogon. So I basically just started joining everything.
Mm-hmm.
I was really, really excited and keen to prove how good I was.
Mm-hmm.
And the first like opportunity that presented itself to me was Smogon Tournament 4. So
That
what's
was
Smogon
the
Tournament?
first OST, as they call it these days, with Diamond and Pearl.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. The previous ones were Gen 3.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I
So,
think one thing that really added to the hype behind Smogon Tournament 4 was the predictions tournament. It was like a major, major part of the tournament.
mm-hmm.
Like nowadays, it's like
Kind of whatever.
nobody
Yeah.
really cares about it.
Yeah.
But back then, everybody was participating. The results of it were really prominent on the threads.
Mm-hmm.
And in that particular tournament, there was also a bracket that was used instead of random pairings. So that also contributed a bit to the hype. People were like predicting particular matchups later on.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I faced the moderator in round 1, whose name I don't really want to say.
Sure,
because
it's been 10 years. It more actually.
I don't know if you know the name that I'm talking about, but
Try me.
hmm, okay, so it's spelled Phuquoph, I think. So
Never mind. I have no idea. Wait, I just heard a bunch of P's and Q's and H's, and I
yeah,
was trying to
well,
put it together.
you think about how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
Any,
Anyway,
um,
so I
so
assume you won. Yeah.
he was a mod, so I thought this guy's gonna be like a tough opponent for me,
Hmm.
but he was not. And I also found out that he thought that he was like the underdog in that matchup
Hmm.
later. And then round two, I faced Husk. So at that point, people had really started to notice me because of my like presence at the top of the ladder,
Hmm.
and they were excited for that game. And predictions for that round were going against me because obviously Husk had a reputation,
Hmm.
and I was like strongly encouraged by the highlight match status that a lot of people were giving to me. I kind of want to stress that like all of the hype that was going into it.
Hmm. Hmm. Do you think that's
Um,
something we kind of lack nowadays, or?
yeah, I think mainly that's because of just how many tournaments there are,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
well, I guess the culture has also changed. But another thing that I think contributes to that is like the different ages of the user base, like then compared to now. I think there were a lot more younger users than now, where there's like an older user base.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Everyone seems to be like 20 and up. Yeah.
yeah. So
Before I
I
forget this,
ended up.
then I wanted to ask, when you were getting high on the ladder, then how were you tackling the metagame? I mean, we have the team in the R&T archive, the Milo, Sella, Heatran, other stuff. Also, I am
Yeah,
hearing a
I
little
was.
bit of echo on your side. But what were you using on that ladder to tackle that metagame? Or those metagames, rather, because it fluctuated a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say I would have been using the same few teams because back then people didn't team build nearly as much as they do now.
Hmm.
So I probably would have used that team that I posted in the RMT section a heck of a lot. But I remember I also used I probably used a lot of Scarf Chomp teams. I really really liked Scarf Chomp.
Hmm.
There was a lot of tier changes that went on, like you said. Like Wobbuffet was tested, and then there was Deoxys S, all kinds of different meta games.
Hmm. Crazy stuff being dropped down,
Mm,
too.
yeah. Uh, but I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty difficult for me to remember those specifics because it's been a
It's
very,
been a
very, very
decade
long
plus, yeah. All right. So back to Smogon Tournament 4 against Husk. How did that go down?
Yeah, so I ended up beating Husk, so a lot of people didn't expect that. And then round three, I faced Fear.
Hmm.
So back then, I didn't really know that he had such a great reputation. I know that he did have a reputation because I could see that people were hyping the matchup.
Hmm.
Um, but I ended up winning that one as well.
Hmm.
Round four, then I faced Roger 23. I'm sure that nobody knows now. I was that was like the first time where I was a heavy favorite, but I barely managed to win that one. And then round five, I faced uh, Gerber Rage, and I was like easily a massive favorite there. Like I really thought that I was gonna win the tournament or something. Or like, I was looking at the rest of the players, thinking that Imperfect Luck, Goofball, Loki, they were going to be the main competition for me to win the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
But I ended up losing. People were even saying in the thread like it would be me versus Imperfect Luck in the finals, or nobody stopping Earthworm and stuff. But yeah, I lost to Gobo Rage.
Don't you love those prediction posts? They just make you feel good. So that's something else
Yeah.
we have less of these days. CL used to tell me that it was because Discord killed the forums, so everything just gets done on Discord now. But back then there was a lot of forum excitement. You know, if you wanted to say something to someone else, you had to do it on the forums.
Mm,
So
it's kind of true, but there was IRC back then,
mm-hmm.
and mm, I suppose it's not at the level of Discord
Yeah, it's not as
now.
accessible because I
Mm,
remember in the Gen 5 days when people in SPL would recruit like some new black and white player and be like, you got to use IRC. There were so many people who would complain about how hard it was to use. So,
right, yeah, that's true. Even though there was a smogon.com/IRC that had like this guide explaining everything about how to get under
yeah,
MIRC.
it's not as intuitive. So, well, Discord, my girlfriend has Discord. So, um,
Yeah, much more
anyway, let's
mainstream.
yeah keep going. So Smoking Tournament 4, and that kind of crashed and burned, but that's still kind of impressive, or kind of impressive, beating Husk in round two. That's usually the kind of matchup people complain about, and
Yeah.
so let's segue that from that Smoking Tournament 4. That's not really the kind of dizzying heights that you then became known for doing in Gen 4. So what were some of those?
So after that tournament, like a lot of people were already recognizing that because of how far I got in that I was really good. I was going to do really well,
Mm-hmm.
and I was getting a lot of predictions in all the unofficial tournaments, which were taken way more seriously at the time.
That's
So
true.
I
That's very
joined pretty
true.
much everything that was posted.
Yeah, and you won
I
a lot of
lost.
them too. And for a long time, then you had by far the most amount of tournaments won. It was like you 20 plus, IPL 21 ish, and then guys like G80 and Mop around the 10 mark.
Mm,
This was until 6 years ago when McMegan became the number one. But yeah, that was a very long-standing record. And there were even posts like I remember you won this tournament in 2011, and it was like the reverse tournament in black and white, or just the first black and white tournament I remember too. And one of the posts was, I swear, "Oh, Earthworm won the tournament. How original!" So it was that level of being expected to win. But we're not quite there yet. So you're still post Smoking Tournament 4. You're getting predictions in the smaller tours, which were a big deal. So where do
yeah.
we go from here?
So I had deep runs in a lot of those unofficial tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
Like I lost in the finals of the Diversity Cup, which was a tournament where you had to bring like an NFE
Mm-hmm.
and then an Uber, OU, and a bunch of other restrictions like that.
Mm-hmm.
I lost in the finals to Mop, and then another loss was in the semifinals of the Rainbow Cup, which was OU with Hoa, which I think was like being considered for OU at the time because it didn't have access to all the moves that it got in like Platinum or whatever.
Yeah, it didn't get Brave Bird until Heart Gold and Soul Silver.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And then by then I was like a favorite to win pretty much all of the games against my opponents in the unofficial tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
And people were even describing me as like overrated sometimes, which is like it's
Mm.
kind of a sign that you've gotten somewhere, right?
I mean, I guess, but it still stings. You know,
It does, yeah.
no one
I,
likes
I
reading
remember
criticisms about themselves.
my, my teenage self being really annoyed by all of those overrated posts and even just predictions against me.
Mm.
Yeah, I was pretty
Even those
obsessed.
can get you riled up. Like you see some guy predicting against you, and you're like, "What? What are you talking about?" So
Yeah, exactly.
it's like, oh, that's just because I called him a dick on ladder one time or something. Anyway, yeah,
Yeah,
please
and
continue.
then I finally got my first win in a Smogon tournament by sweeping with like a curse amnesia rollout registeel in a DPP Ubers tournament against the maniac lyricist.
Maniacally racist, yeah. What
Maniacally
a great
racist, yeah.
username. Racist with two S's. But yeah, yeah, that Registeel. That's I remember when people actually used him in OU. You know, it wasn't, and it was good because it had Blissey syndrome of if it's fat enough on the special side, then you know. Anyway, so you're winning these smaller tournaments, and what got you say that best OU battler award at the Smog?
Yeah, so I won a couple of other smaller tournaments, and then around the same time as those tournaments, I entered the World Cup of Pokemon. I think that was the third one. That was my first World Cup of Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a different format. It was like the pools were still the same in the first round, but then it went into a single elimination bracket after that.
Mm-hmm.
And I had another fairly deep run in that, but then I lost to Taylor in
Mm-hmm.
like round of 12, so I guess the quarterfinals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first three World Cups had a weird format where it was like kind of a individual tournament too. So that's why
Yeah,
2009 the first three then Asia won, and then 2009 the year Oceania won. Then that was considered the start of modern World Cup, where it was legitimately a team effort.
yeah. But anyway, the next event, which really pushed my reputation up, was Smogon Tour 6.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first ever DP or DPP. I'm not sure which one it was at that stage. I think it was DP at the start, and then I think in the playoffs it moved into some very odd format like DPP. What was it? It was very strange anyway.
I remember seeing some logs back then, and there were no Rotom forms or Bullet Punch Scizors, so I think it was safe to assume it was probably still Diamond and Pearl.
Right. Yes. So I think, yeah, that reminds me. So what happened was Garchomp got banned like right as I think Platinum was released,
Mm-hmm.
and Aeolus or whatever his name is, his decision was to not allow Platinum moves, but to consider Garchomp as being banned. So
Mm-hmm.
it was like a meta that didn't really exist,
Mm-hmm.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. You're still kind
Yeah.
of
So that
figuring
was
it out in the or on the biggest stage.
yeah, exactly. But I think most people just probably adapted existing teams because there wasn't nearly as much team building, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so that Smogon tour, the regular season for me was, I was super duper hyped for that. I was like waking up at like 5 or 6 a.m. in the morning to play in all of those.
Oh yeah,
I was
because
like,
Smogon Tour time zones for people in Australia are ridiculous.
yeah, they're
Yeah,
really
yeah.
terrible. So
I remember
I have
Heist
a
used
lot
to
of
tell me
respect
stories
for.
about Golden Sun waking up and playing Smogon Tour before he went to church on Sundays.
Yeah, it was pretty much like that for me.
Mm-hmm.
I would get up and be like shaking because it would be really cold, and
Oh,
I would just sit there at my computer refreshing,
oh,
trying to get the
that's
first
so
post.
sad. Why don't we have one universal time zone and make everything so much easier? Anyway, yeah, please continue.
Yeah, so I kind of had mixed results during that season,
Mm-hmm.
but I did win one of the live tours where I beat like Atticus in round one, but nobody knew who he was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had like IPL, Loki, and Eternal in the last 3 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
He was called like Arin or something at the time.
Aaron, yeah, like Arin, yeah.
Yeah. And even though I only won that one tour, I got first seed in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
So then in round one of Uh, the playoffs, I beat Taylor, who I was very happy to beat because he'd been like predicting against me, and I lost to him in World Cup. So
Mm-hmm.
it was my revenge there. And then I beat Eternal in the semi-final.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to face Guki, or I don't know how you say his
Goki,
name
I think.
exactly.
Yeah.
Guki.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to face him in the finals. He was pretty much my closest friend in the community. I'd been like working with him for the entirety of the Smogon tour regular season,
Mm-hmm.
as well as in the playoffs as well. So it was kind of awkward, um, being like best friends and having to meet in the finals.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final games themselves were like not the best quality either. There was a few factors that went into that. Like one thing was he like misunderstood something I told him on MSN Messenger. Yeah,
Now
do
that's
you
a
know MSN
throwback.
Messenger?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I told he asked me like if I was gonna bring the same team, like the same UU team, like he was almost asking like a gentleman's agreement to just bring the same UU teams that we always use.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like that sounds so ridiculous these days, right?
It does. It does.
Sounds
I mean, it was a
absolutely
smaller community back then. You know, it was more tightly knit. So, like, if you were an asshole, then people gave you shit for it. Whereas nowadays, if you're an asshole, you get praised for it. I'm not a grandpa, I swear. But yeah, it was more of same reason. Like these days, like take the example of last year when Lavos won Classic, largely in part to using baton pass against M Dragon in Game 5 of the semis series. If that happened in Gen 4 era Smogon, or God forbid earlier, then he would have been crucified off the site. Because it
oh yeah.
was the reason stuff like baton pass didn't get used was because it was more about a system of honor. And whether you want to talk about that being anti-competitive is another thing. I mean, the answer is
Mm.
yes, I suppose, but that's a whole different debate. But yeah, like so, gentlemen's agreements were not that far fetched. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah. Well, I think that we had like a bit of a special relationship there since we were like pretty much best friends at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably played into it as well. I wouldn't say that happened regularly, that people would like consider agreeing to use teams that each other knew.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I gave an evasive answer to his like question about that, and he seemingly took that as saying, "Yes, I'm going to use the same team as usual,"
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't like say no. So he was very upset because I changed my team to uh, basically handle a threat that he had.
Was it
Like
Specs
it was
Glaceon?
a yes.
Yeah,
How the
I've heard it from Atticus before. That
okay?
he was spamming the Specs Glaceon team, and then this thick fat Walrus switches in and takes 3% from Ice Beam.
Thick February. Yeah,
And I
that
was like,
was
wait,
it. So
was it a Hail team? And it was like he was like, no, it was just a random Walrus.
yeah, it was just a random Wolverine.
Mm-hmm.
But I legitimately was losing to that and other things, and it was a pretty good fit on my team at the time. I genuinely think.
Mm-hmm. Then I remember hearing in Ubers there was some U2 speed tie stuff, and I don't remember what happened in OU at all.
Yeah, I think I don't really remember the Ubers game very much, but I'm pretty sure it was terrible. Like, I think I might have used. I know there was a Mew involved and Mewtwo, but that's pretty much all I can remember. Other than that, I thought the game was just terrible. But that my memory of it might be like tainted by how I was feeling like guilty about beating him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I really didn't feel that good about that victory, but I have to say that it definitely contributed a lot to my reputation on the site
Mm-hmm.
because it gave me the pink trophy trophies were incredibly rare back then.
They
There were
were.
very, very few opportunities
You
to get
had
them.
official Smogon tournament, Smogon tour, and like I think that was it. I mean, then Frontier came around that time, but it took a while for anyone to win it, and
Yeah,
so it really wasn't very commonplace. So you had like single digit trophy holders,
yeah.
or barely double digit stuff like that. Anyway, so Smogon
Oh,
Tour 6, what happens after that? This is the stuff that I hope that some people might remember, but this is like getting into the area where it was like the legend of Earthworm cemented, let's say, to give it some dramatic flair.
yeah. So definitely the next thing that really uh, pretty much permanently cemented my status as like one of the best players of that era was the World Cup of Pokemon 4, which had that new team format like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go straight to the finals. The finals was Oceania versus Asia. So Asia had come off like a 3 World Cup win streak.
Mm-hmm.
So they're the obvious favorites. And they were up 4-3 in the finals against us, with me as the last person to play.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And it was
and it was
supposed to be against Goofball, I think.
originally it was against like Itachi 109 or something,
Mm-hmm.
but then he didn't show up. And then they subbed in Goofball, who also didn't show up. And then they subbed in Dawnbringer. And so I finally got to play against Dawnbringer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All
Uh,
I remember about
that
reading
was
the log of that game was that there was for more people who are interested in reading history, then if you go into the RMT archive, then you will find Jumpluff posted the team that Earthworm used against Dawnbringer. It was called Team Sugarless Girl, and it
Yep.
had a Shukaberry Heatran lead without Earth Power, Gliscor, Wish Calm Mind Rachi, which was catching around at that time, Scarf Rotom, and oh god, I can't remember the rest. I'm a failure. Anyway, yeah, the game against Dawnbringer was a tremendous success. I just remember he had a Togekiss, and that was it.
Yeah, I think I might have also had like a HP Fire Grass Knot Latias,
Yes,
maybe.
yes, that set was a big deal, and people were like, "Oh, well, Heatran's a big threat. You got to put Surf on." And you were explaining that Grass Knot was a big deal, not just because of Swampert, but because it trucks Tyranitar. And
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, so please continue because this is where it gets juicy, I guess.
Yes. So a lot of people were predicting me to beat Dawnbringer because I had quite the reputation by that point. Dawnbringer did not. But then the tiebreaker, we were at 4-4, and I had to play against Husk. So he was 7-0 in the tour, like so far. Like he'd won every single game leading up to the tiebreaker. Whereas I'd lost one, I was like 5-1 or something. And I think the predictions were probably against me, although I did have some people predicting me. And well, yeah, I'm sure you know what happened. I managed to beat him.
There is a YouTube video of this. If you just look up Earthworm versus Husk and put in some stuff like Pokemon Smogon World Cup, so you don't get videos of actual earthworms and stuff like that. Has happened before. Then you will see the actual finals battle, and I know it's on Shoddy Battle and it's hard to follow, but first of all, it'll make you appreciate the amazing simulator we have now. And second of all, come on, it is not that monumentous a task. So yeah, that was a big win, and that was like legitimate superstar territory, generational superstar, as our good friend Atticus Finch once put it. So yeah, where do we go from there? After World
Well,
Cup 2009, then that's still a year plus, or a year, let's call it, of DPP and notable things to happen. I remember specifically, a bunch of really important matches with Goki, like not just Smogon Tour 6, but all sorts of tournaments leading up to that. Or not leading up to that, I'm sorry, afterwards. Sorry.
I remember playing him in the Smogon Frontier, the one that I think he won.
Mm-hmm.
That's something memorable to me. I think I might have beaten him the first time around, and then the second game was really, really intense, and he barely managed to beat me. He was like
really upset because you kept critting him. Yeah, I remember reading the logs.
Yeah.
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 I remember. I'm a fan of this stuff, so I remember stuff like one of the games you had a Pursuit Toxicroak. I wonder how that happened.
Yeah, that was the game that I'm thinking of.
Mm-hmm. And then Zapdos HPI'd Flygon on the Switch, because that's when Flygon was everyone's switch to everything, even things it doesn't counter, like Zapdos. But yeah, those are some tight things, games, sorry. And I remember you guys played, not just for World Cup 2010, but I think there was even something else, like the later stages of an OST, although I might be misremembering that.
Yeah, I can't remember that either, but I know that I played him in another World Cup tiebreaker. Mm-hmm. I think that was just to get out of like round 1 or something.
Yes, it was. It was the qualifier for the playoffs.
Yeah, I think he must have been really, really.
He was really upset about that one because you lit off with a Thunderwave Jirachi, and then your strategy for beating lead Machamp was subbing with Breloom until it full parried, and it full parried twice.
Right, yeah. Wow, you have a great memory for these things.
I read it more recently, but yeah. So you guys played a lot, and I think it was really cool how such defining metagame superstars, pardon my drama, were able to face off so often. Now I feel like we have so many good players that it's not as much of a spectacle and an event as it used to be, which was best exemplified in the first battle of the week, because great players battling each other was such a rare event that they had to organize them battling each other in public so everyone could actually watch it. And you versus Goki was the first one of that, which goes to show how important that rivalry of sorts was. And it's still one of my favorite games ever. You can also find that on YouTube, and spoiler alert, that will also soon be on the channel. But yeah, so I think it was really cool how you were able to play guys like that all the time, it seemed, for big tournaments, and have it be something special.
That's definitely true, yeah. That game. That was the game where he spoke to me with the DD-tar, right?
DD Fire Blast Tyranitar. I think.
Right, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Part of what I geek out about the old DPP players is that the ones that were really good always seem to have an edge, not just in the game, but in like sets. And I'm not talking about stuff like sometimes you get new players who accuse the old so-called best players of feasting on idiots who didn't know what they were doing. And so it's not like, you brought Skarmory and you faced a bunch of people with 5 scissors that couldn't ever break through it. But more like stuff like DD Fire Blast Tar, I mean, that's not something you would traditionally think of now at all. And he used it to incredible effect, which is one reason why I like that game. And even in that game on your side, you had a light screen Rotom, which is something I've only tried out because I saw you use it in that game. And to this day, I still can't really figure out a great use for it. So I think like that aspect of, I mean, I could geek out about that forever, and I won't for the sake of time. But I think that aspect of guys like you and Goki and Husk and Panamaxis and whoever else you can name from that era, you could do that forever too. I think that was something really special about that time frame.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyone else who wants to read even more history, because we're talking about time periods so old that everything was written down, then you can look up an article from the Smog about Earthworm versus Schofield, which was also for World Cup 2010. And in that game, you had a Scarf Tentacruel, and I mean, I know Salamence was dangerous, but that was still just crazy.
Oh man, I bet you Panamax probably put me up to that. He really loved Scarf Tentacruel.
What did it do other than tie Salamence and absorb toxic spikes and set toxic spikes, I guess?
Yeah, honestly, I don't even think it's that good a Pokemon, but I believe one of the reasons that it's chosen is for Infernape,
Oh
because it
yeah,
resists that
of
close
course.
combat.
Yeah, not
But
weak
I'm
to
sure it
grass
still
knot.
takes it from it.
Uh,
Yeah, not weak grass, not either.
for people who are interested in looking through the DPP era, go through some forums, dig through some logs, watch some YouTube videos of shoddy battles, read some articles, and Earthworm is all over them. And usually the debate was, Earthworm versus Goki, and you were on top of most debates. And there was such a level of reverence, and I know I sound like a total kiss ass right now, but bear with me. There was such a level of reverence for what you did in those age and how much you dominated that it spread beyond Smogon. So let me give you an example. Like current day, then the other day, McMegan just posted a thread on, stop giving everyone all your teams. And some guy has no idea who McMegan is, given all his accomplishments, and he's on Smogon. And that kind of thing is widespread with how Pokemon is sort of outsourced to having such a big following on YouTube. You could say the name ABR or McMegan or whoever to some guy on YouTube, and you'd be like, I guess I've kind of heard of that name, but a lot of them would just go, no. And even on YouTube, back then, and the sub-communities of YouTube, then people knew Earthworm. It was like, oh yeah, that guy, he's like by far the best. He's this utter genius. He'll like make your head spin. And obviously some of it was elevated to levels of our version of urban legends and myths, I guess. But at the same time, then there was a certain kind of, and to give a concrete example, one of the most influential things I remember reading at a young age was Hitmonlee. Black and White had just come out, and we'll get to Black and White in a minute. But Black and White had just come out, and everyone was freaking out over Team Preview. Some people, even back then, were like, "Oh, well, now you don't get to, sweep with a Gyarados that you didn't know was there." Whereas other people were like, "Well, you should have figured out that there was a Gyarados in the first place," and stuff like that. And Hitmonlee, I remember, was very, very against it. And to cite an example of how it took a certain skill out of the game, he used one of your World Cup games where you sent out a Skarmory and just randomly, seemingly for no reason, went for Brave Bird, and the other guy switched into Breloom, and it just died. And now it's easy for someone who wants to make it seem not that impressive, like, oh, well, Infernape is a switch into Skarmory, and, it stops Starmie from coming in for totally free, and 100 other things you could think of if you really wanted to. But the fact is that never would have been said unless that play wasn't so astounding, because it's the kind of play that 99 out of 100 players would not think to click. And so that's the kind of... I realize I'm monologuing here, just like Syndrome, but it was really special in many senses. So let's move on to Black and White, because even though most people are not really aware that you used to play Black and White, you did. So tell us about that.
I had I guess I played for like a year or so, maybe, or maybe slightly more than a year. Around that time, I think I was also delving into old gens a lot, like a lot more than I was actually playing the current gen. And I was like, when I was getting better at RBY, GSC, and like I don't think I played much RSC, but because I already played a lot of it back on Net Battle, but I also did play some BW. I used to enjoy using a Sun team. I think I had like Magic Bounce Espion maybe.
I think you were
And
probably the only non-French top player to use Sun in early Black and White. And I'm
yeah,
not even
I
talking French like Ojama. I'm talking French like like his teammates. That's a mean thing to say. I'm sorry, but they were the only guys who were really making Sun into a serious team style. You know.
mhm.
So and yeah,
Yeah.
you won the first official Black and White or not official, sorry, unofficial Black and White tournament, but it was the first Black and White OU tournament on Smogon, and people were, that was still a big deal. Unofficial tournaments, people got excited. Like to give you an idea, this is gonna blow people's minds, but let's say it's 2011 or 2012 and there was just a standard DPPOU tournament. Like it stopped being the main gen a year or two ago. Let's just host a regular old Gen 4 OU tournament. And Ace Matador would PM me like, hey, let's test for that tournament. You would test for unofficial tournaments because they were that much of a big deal. So,
Yeah.
yeah. The Black and White
I
original tournament was that. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, just on that unofficial tournament note, I would put like ridiculous amounts of time into testing for those. I think there was a, like a gimmick tournament that I built like 7 teams for, which was absolutely unheard of back then. I think like nobody did that, and I would be constantly asking people for tests for that tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess that was partly because the community was closer at that time, and partly because there weren't many like other tournaments at the same time going on like there
Whereas
are
now you're
nowadays.
kind of flooded by official stuff all the time. I noticed that
Yeah.
that kind of drive to win tournaments hasn't really left you though, because we'll get to your GSCing quite soon. But something that sticks out from the GSC neck of the woods specifically is how you've been delving into the lower tiers in GSC and NU.
Oh,
And, some people a couple of years ago, this is the point where unofficial tournaments are mostly uncool by this point. And you put this massive amount of effort into GSC NU and have pretty much just taken over as the tier leader. But at the time, it wasn't like, all right, I'm gonna do this in the GSC NU thing just to make it a real tier. And you just put together a spreadsheet analyzing this tier that no one understood, and all people thought was, oh well, Pikachu's broken, and you put together this sheet, and it was like Pikachu's strong, but it can't switch in, and Doug Trio destroys it. That's Spark Notes. But that kind of drive to win that tournament and like the GSC Ubers tournament, I think that's never really left you. Maybe you're not building 7. Well, you're still building a lot of teams, but I think that kind of drive has played a part in your success, especially since a lot of players will say that trying is stupid and things like that, but it's kind of the opposite. So. Then again, we
yeah.
do currently live in a pretty try-hard age, so maybe that's not the most accurate statement. Anyway, so going on to the tournament things, so we can finally wrap this up, is World Cup 2011, then you managed to do it again, and this time in black and white. Tell us about that.
Black and white, yeah. So I can't remember a whole lot from that tournament, but I know that the finals, the tiebreaker was the game against Phil,
Big
right?
Phil, yeah. He brought Aaron, as in Aron, Aaron. Yeah.
Yeah, that was quite the game. I had the pretty much the perfect answer to that.
Yeah, in the obscure counter, Poison Heal Gliscor.
Yeah, so obscure, right?
Yeah.
I even had like sub protect Gliscor, so
Yeah, and I think you had a Haxorus too, which was strange. Or no, I must be misremembering, but I remember there was like Heatran and other bulky stuff. And I remember
I
playing someone on the ladder who was using your team after, and that was like a big deal. Then, like nowadays, someone uses something in, let's say, SPL finals, and that team is everywhere, instantly. But back then it was like, oh, this guy's using less tournaments and they were more important. So some guy using the team that was featured in the recent Smogon Tour finals was a big deal. So
yeah. More people, uh, a lot of people used teams that were posted as RMTs, but apart from that, there was not much like copying of teams or spreading of teams, like at all.
So let's move on to question number 3. What are your favorite competitive Pokemon memories? So this can be anything. This can be, laddering until 5 a.m., that super healthy habit. Just shooting the shit with your World Cup teammates, stuff like that.
Yeah, so I've already mentioned some of my favorite memories. So I think like it's natural for people to remember the early days when they were not at the top of like the game, because once you're at the top, it just like a lot of your wins are less meaningful. You agree with that?
Yes, but I'm interested to hear why you think that.
Well, since you're the favorite, it's really disappointing if you lose, and it's like, oh yeah, well, I thought I was going to win that. It's like a relief that you win.
Yeah, like those lose-lose scenarios, like where you play some guy who's kind of a jackass, but he's also kind of good. So, yeah, but he's not so good that you're expected to beat him, but that you're not expected to beat him. But you win, and it's kind of like, all right, well, congratulations. And you lost. It's like, oh, you lost to a clown. So you open yourself up to that kind of stuff a lot.
Yeah.
And I know this sounds like, the big successful Pokemon players bitch about how hard they have it, but it is. So, sometimes you need perspective, but it is annoying because sometimes you just have a bad game and you get jumped on for it.
I think it's like a genuine psychological thing for
really
people at the top.
So once you're at the top, then what do you think happens?
Yeah, like you're under more pressure to win, obviously, so that kind of takes away from it a bit. And losing hurts a lot more. Winning doesn't feel as good. But then again, there's the really high highs that are still out there. Like, I'm sure you're familiar with that, with how many trophies you've won.
Yeah, I'm pretty great. But because this isn't about me, despite how much I might talk, then I agree with that. I think it's an interesting phenomenon. There's a lot of, as a psych major, then I think Smogon is a very interesting kind of bay of case studies and all the interesting personalities and behaviors we have on it. And, little stuff ranging from why do people act like assholes when they hacks you? And the answer is because they're immature kids who think it's cool to act like they're in a gang or something. To stuff like, I just don't get the same joy from winning now that everyone expects me to win. And, I think it's, for anyone who's really interested, I'm sure you could do a lot of research in that. But you bring up a good point. So what would an example of you not being as fulfilled by success on Smogon now that you're, well known and expected to be successful be?
Examples of not being fulfilled?
Yeah, despite, succeeding and people going, oh, well, he's succeeded. Shocker.
Well, I've already given a couple, like I don't think I mentioned that tiebreaker, the first tiebreaker that I won against Husk. That was also like tainted because I think him and also Goki too like accused me of scouting, or our team of scouting their test games or something like that. So it was really stressful for me to deal with that because it wasn't true at all. I had absolutely no idea what it was going to bring.
Yeah, I remember I think even Husk might have told me that you were one of the first players to build teams specifically for opponents. So The current
Right,
culture
yeah.
of people making terrible teams just to counter their opponents is entirely your fault. That's what I got from that.
Yeah,
No, that's not true. But yeah, I remember hearing stuff like that. So if you want to expand on that.
yes, he was. That was another point he was criticizing me on after losing to me. So
Hmm.
mm, he was accusing me of bringing a suboptimal team, which like I disagree with. I think like my team was reasonably solid. I don't even know exactly what he was referring to with that.
Hmm.
Like, I think it was.
Starmy,
Mm,
Blissey.
oh my
That's
gosh, are
most
you
of what.
actually gonna?
No, I remember Blissey stayed in on his pursuit Metagross. I remember he led off with Arrow. You led off with Starmie. Uh, he didn't get up rocks because you had E-Speed Lucario, then Blissey. I guess Lucario and Blissey wasn't exactly common together. I remember he
Yeah.
had a Dragonite. I think you had a Jirachi. Maybe both had Jirachis. Someone might have had an Infernape. Real clear picture I'm
I
painting,
had.
I know. But yeah, we'd have to analyze that video to really
Yeah.
get into the nitty gritty there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you were saying.
Yeah, there was some mind games in that as well. Like,
Mhm.
I think my Lucario, because I'd used Sash Lucario against him on like the ladder or something, he thought, oh, I better stay in to make sure he can't Swords Dance and
Mhm.
still have a Sash up with my Aerodactyl.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I had, yeah, I think it was a Gyarados Salamence team. Like, I had both of them.
Yes, yes, I remember that.
Yeah, and
It's
he
like no matter
was.
what I'm gonna lose to, I'm not gonna lose to Lucario.
Yeah, and he. So the first thing he was saying was that there was very suspicious stuff going on. These guys logged onto the CAP server, the Creative Pokemon server, where I was testing with somebody. There was no way to disable spectators, and there were limited options for servers. So if you wanted to test, you pretty much had to depend on people not logging on and
Mhm.
opening your game.
Mhm.
But scouting was not really a thing so much back then. It
Mhm.
became more of a thing later, and now I think it's kind of gone away again because people just build new teams.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing that he was criticizing me about, like I just said, was the suboptimal team. He was claiming that good players would make teams that are solid against everything, and my team was apparently not that.
That sounds like what
So
I usually say when I'm complaining about some idiot who decided that, well, this guy won't bring insert top metagame threat. Let me make this team that does really well when it doesn't exist. So I get the sentiment. Whether it was accurate or not is another idea. So,
yeah,
yeah. All right, so let's keep this moving because we do like to meander. Also, I gotta say, Sash Lucario, that is a throwback and a half. Back when Focus Sash was the default item on like everything,
right.
especially
I didn't
because
mention that
Luke is
earlier.
so frail.
It was everywhere. Focus Sash, Weavile. Weavile was
Oh,
everywhere too.
yeah, I remember. If anyone wants to go digging through more Pokemon history, this isn't Smogon, but like stuff like MTG Xerxes' Wi-Fi battles. He wasn't a top ladder or anything, but he knew the metagame really well, especially back in that Diamond and Pearl era. And like he talks about stuff like expecting Lucario to have sashes, and even like Weavile and stuff, and it's just mind blowing. Um, Something I do want to ask you before we move on to the next question is your stance on uh, the old versus new, because we seem to be in an era right now where the new is really waging war on the old. And I admit I have an agenda in this because I do, but I don't think I have bias because my stance is that I know I did this in the McMegan interview too. I was like, "What's your opinion on this?" Here's my opinion first, but let me just make it clear where I'm coming from. So the current generation, or not even generation, there's just a very vocal minority right now, which is really focused on shitting on everything the past ever did. Some of it is tongue in cheek, some of it isn't, and obviously we don't like to think that all of our accomplishments were made null and void by people playing idiots, by us only playing idiots and being the few non-monkeys playing against a bunch of monkeys. But so, what are your thoughts on that? How do you think the game or the players in the game have progressed from then to now?
So I kind of think that there's a lot of I think there's a lot of truth to what those people are saying, but the reason for it is not because the people back then were idiots.
Mm-hmm.
It's because uh, the resources that are available these days are like much different. The culture is much different,
Mm-hmm.
and the focus on these official metagames is even like ridiculously strong.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, it was not quite as strong. Um, so I think like these people that are complaining about that, they're not really putting it into perspective. Like, let's just say that some of these people that are complaining played, like, if they could like somehow like take a time machine and come up in that community, I don't think you could like expect that these players are like more bright than the players then.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
So, are you attributing it more to the plethora of resources we have these days, really helping everyone grow at a
The
much
resources,
greater exponential rate?
yeah, the resources, the attitude of the community, the number of tournaments that focus on the same tiers, all of those things are contributing to the like I guess ease of getting better and the
Mm-hmm.
higher standards these days.
Yeah, like I agree that the average player skill level is pretty high, but sometimes, let's say I'm gonna be semi-mean here, and like some people will say the common term is crust, which I think is incredibly demeaning. And even though I get the idea, it's he used to be good, but now and now you're only Hitmonlee made a great post on Pokemon Perfect that people will say you're only as good as your last tournament, and everything you accomplished in the past was void because you only played people who didn't know what they were doing. And Hip's been around since literally the 90s. So in the Pokemon scene, that is. So he's like seen it all, and a lot of that resonated with me. And the reason I thought of this was not just because you're the old and we're very much in an age of the new, but because when I was thinking of the Xerxes Wi-Fi battles of Sash Weaviles and Sash Lucarios and other primitive stuff, then I remember there was this game where one of his opponents had a banned Weavile and he pursued a Garchomp. And pursuing everything under the sun has become a very popular high IQ, let's call it, a play that makes people stop and stare like, wow, he knows what he's doing. And this was being done in 2007, 2008. So, the ideas of what is really great Pokemon have always been there. They're just more accessible to everyone now. So, I don't know what kind of conclusion you draw from that. Just you, the listener, if you shit on the past, well, make sure you have the right perspective because there was amazing Pokemon then. Just like there's shitty Pokemon then, but there's also shitty Pokemon now. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's great games from back then. I mean, really amazing stuff. Like I'm gonna be covering G80 versus Goofball on the channel in the near future. That's an ancient game and it's incredibly high level. So anyway, this is not me saying old is better than you. It's saying it's different, and you have to view it for what it was, and not just call everything before a certain period, caveman nonsense. Believe it or not, double switching existed back in RBY too. Anyway, so that has been my sponsored break. So, Earthworm, what skills do you value in Pokemon? This question I think is interesting. It always gets a different answer from everybody.
Yeah, so there's a lot of skills that I value in Pokemon. I think one of the first ones that comes to mind is the ability to like innovate in the team builder and still succeed. Like there's some players that definitely come to mind for that. Like for GSC, there's Lavos. Like he obviously does a lot of innovating, and he brings it to the big matches and still wins. I don't know, like people that can do that, they really, really impress me. That's definitely a skill that I value.
Why do you value innovation over just winning with the standards? To play devil's advocate for a second.
That's a good like question.
Because at the
I
end of the
think
day, some people might say a win's a win, whether you're doing it with
it
OUs or a team of
definitely
UUs.
that's definitely true. But like, just I think it's been that way since like the really old days. Like back then, like I've been kind of discovering lately, having revamped like GSC UU analyses. Like people back then, they were like when they talked about UU, they were talking about using UUs against OUs. So like, uh, the analyses all say like this is the UU Pokemon, but these are the OU Pokemon that it can beat. There were some people like McGraw that were kind of known for that, and like Veteran in Love as well. I believe he also did a lot of that, and that earned a lot of respect back then. And I think it's still something that like deserves respect. I'm not saying that winning with just standards is not impressive, because it's still very impressive to like execute a game plan and all of that. There's a lot of other skills that are also valuable. It's just that the ability to innovate like that and succeed is something that it kind of expands like your how do I put it?
I was going to ask, do you think that being able to win, it kind of shows a deeper understanding of the metagame, do you think?
It does, yeah.
And
That's kind
that's
of what I
that in
want
and of
to say.
itself is another form of skill. It's like this is another popular debate raging right now. Like any idiot can grab the latest team of, let's say, T-Tar Skarmory in whatever gen and do fine. But it's not about using dumb shit for the sake of it. It's about using your understanding of the metagame to not use, a dumb UU Pokemon, but even just like an unorthodox way of using a standard Pokemon. Just really, it's not, maybe it's not about innovation. Obviously surprise factor is huge, but so much as just really finding the most optimal way to win. Maybe it's a convoluted way to come back to that point.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, that was the next thing that I was going to mention, like being able to execute game plans that other people can't, like unorthodox game plans.
Yeah, you've been known in history. This is going to sound like a little bit of a dig. You've been known to be a bit on the lucky side, and I'm sure if anyone old like KD24 hears this, then they'll have a conniption. I mentioned KD because I remember him ranting about how lucky Earthworm was in this one SPL game where you got like 5 consecutive full paras, and it was at that point where you kind of go like, dude, come on. But and a lot of that, which no one else really did. So speaking of honor, then that's and how it doesn't exist anymore. That's not as a slight to new players without honor or anything. That's just saying that it doesn't inform how the game is played. But let's say back then, some people would legitimately feel bad if they won because of a crit. Whereas, so if it's just for fun, then who cares? So you would feel bad, but for a tournament, it's like, no, good, screw him. I want to win. So you were notable for being one of the very few players to adopt the mindset that is commonplace today. It's basically put yourself in that position where you only need 1 full para out of 2 turns to win. Go for that freeze. Go for that triple crit scald burn. Whatever it is. So I think you really identifying Pokemon, and some people have an issue of it. It's like, well, at that point you're just playing math, and that's takes soul out of the game. I mean, I don't think it's a common mindset, but it was one of the ways to really decry that method of playing. But I think that was important because, and it's mostly thanks to you that that's so common these days. Like back then, no one would have said, "Oh, well, he only needed one crit out of 10 turns." They would have just said, "Oh, he got a crit, that lucky son of a bitch," stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know if you can attribute that to like people just not understanding probability or
Oh, definitely, definitely. Like when someone misses one of two focus blasts, and hitting two focus blasts is actually not in your favor. It's 49%, stuff like that. So
yeah,
yeah,
a lot of that is overlooked by people that complain about hacks.
and I think I remember this one turn where in that game where you got the however many consecutive full paras. Then some guy was like makes up for the whatever, and you said makes up for all the turns he wasn't full parried, and that just I obviously at the time I was infuriated, like this asshole, who does he think he is? But then it stuck with me because I was like, I never thought about it. And here's the way CL always told me to think about it: if you have 10 games where you will win if you hit a Draco Meteor, do you deserve to win all 10 games? And that's just, I think that's a great way of putting it. So we do have to operate within the cruel confines of odds very much. So, and to round out this long-winded rant, when there was the debate about freeze claws in GSC, you mentioned using it or identifying freeze as a reasonable strategy, I remember was your phrasing. And
Yes.
And people were like, "What are you talking about?" No, we want less freezes, but myself included, I'm not a fan. But so, is it reasonable to say you value being able to play the odds skillfully in Pokemon?
Yeah, I definitely think that having the ability to identify those outs is something that I value as well. Maximizing probability of winning, identifying the outs, even if they're, you know, freezes, full powers, things that you need to hope for. Crits, it's especially relevant in GSC. Like, you pretty much there's Pokemon in GSC where you almost rely on critting them to get past them. Well, not exactly, but
But it's a big way of
it's
in longer games, yeah.
it is. Yeah,
Yeah, you see
it's
Lavos talk about that a lot. I remember he once said he would have won this one GSC game if he managed to get just one crit in however many turns. And to some people it sounds ridiculous. And even I'll say, yeah, I mean, come on. If I crit whenever I wanted to, then I would never lose another game, right? But the idea was that there are certain Pokemon like Raikou in certain scenarios, and obviously Snorlax, where sometimes they're just so tough to beat, even with a good team. It's just like, well, all right, I gotta hit it a bunch and hope one of those hits, finds a weak spot. So,
yeah, that's exactly right.
now before we move on to the next question, we've covered the first half of Earthworm. So getting good at Gen 3 and then mostly the Gen 4 exploits, early into Gen 5 and whatnot. But these days, to most people, you're that old guy who plays GSC and, the GSC lower tiers. Before we get into those, then GSC OU. So tell us a little about your foray into the best OU tier.
Yes, the best indeed. So I think I must have played GSC a couple of times back when I was first using NetBattle, but I definitely didn't know what I was doing. Then back in 2000 and maybe 2010, 2011, around when Black and White was out, like I said a bit earlier, I was spending a lot of time on NetBattle Supremacy, and that's where GSC was playable. I don't think it was out on PO yet. I'm not sure exactly when it came out.
Early 2012. No.
Yes.
Sorry, 2011. That's RBY. But yeah, 2011. It was playable pretty well actually. That's when Borat was like shaping the PO ladder with his Vaporeon team, and everyone ran Clamp Cloister because he ran Clamp Cloister and stuff like that.
Yeah. So on NBS, uh, there weren't very many people on NBS,
Mm.
but there was Borat and like Nitro and a few other guys. I think Tamaho maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Borat would spend like hours and hours like monologuing in my PM window about GSC.
Sounds like
So,
Coolio these days.
well, he was much crazier than Julio.
Mm.
He would just go on and on and on and on about everything in GSC,
That's
just
because GSC is the
nonstop.
most beautiful tier, so you can get lost in that stuff for hours.
And he gave me the teams that I used for a very long time until I finally started building my own teams in GSC.
Mm.
So I have to credit him for that, and his guides, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like my crash course into GSC, and from there I think I started playing the PO ladder. Um, I never really played the PO ladder as much as I did the Shoddy Battle ladder. I think at that stage my activity was starting to dwindle a bit,
Mm-hmm.
but I really enjoyed GSC a lot. I was like spamming that one Marowak team.
Mm-hmm.
What is it like? Raikou, Marowak, Skarmory, Snorlax,
Miltank
Drumlax,
and Starmie,
Miltank,
yeah.
Starmie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used that team almost all my games,
Mm-hmm.
and I became quite good at using it. Actually, I think my ability to use that team has declined.
Well, that's I think because that team itself has declined, but that's probably accurate too.
I think,
Uh, I
yeah, I think
mean,
it's a mixture of both.
well, I remember that game against Blue Eon, the one with all the paras. Then to go back to that point of always identifying your win condition. At the end, I remember I forget what you were resting on, but it made Marowak use rest just because you knew if he full paras like twice, then I win. And most people at that time would not have thought of that. So anyway, so back
Mm.
to the GSC development. You started to play it. Didn't start to play it in SPL and stuff for a while, I don't think. But you tell me.
Yeah. So I really, really wanted to play GSC, but I don't think my manager trusted me at the time or something like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Uh, so like I was like, yeah, I'll play GSC, but I wasn't like really insisting on it.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So I think I probably still played like DPP or something.
mm-hmm.
And then I think the next year I finally got to play GSC in SPL. And I actually don't remember exactly how it went, but maybe you can help me with that.
Which SPL was that? 3?
The first one that I played GSC in.
I remember you played Advance. It was probably 3 because I remember you played Advance at times, but also GSC. Um, Specifically, I remember when you played Floppy and used dirty tactics to beat him, which I don't remember what it is now, but I think it had something to do with like trapping Mr. Avis or something.
Oh
So
yeah,
yeah, that was probably 3. So that was when people started knowing you as GSC guy. That was especially impressive because you were the first 30K player in SPL. Nowadays we have idiots dropping 30K on every dumb shit who's ever done decently. That's an exaggeration. I just don't think many players are worth 30K. Even the really, really good ones. It's just too much money. And you led them to a championship. And, preseason, people were like, oh, well, the Chaser, your manager, is an idiot. And afterwards, oh, my God, it's a genius. Get Earthworm at all costs. Because that's what it was. Earthworm will make your team win. Or at least he'll win. So.
yeah. Back then, I think that might have been one of the last SPLs where I was like fully dedicated to every aspect of the game. So I would have been helping in probably a lot of the tiers. as in at least testing, and yeah. But
Mhm.
I'm looking at the game, like the results that I had now, and I think my results were fairly middling in the season.
Mhm.
I lost to like Gigapunch, Spies, Jorgen.
Those
I
are
beat
good GSC
Floppy, and
players.
yeah, they were definitely good at the time.
Mhm.
And then I beat like Ditto, who I don't think he would have played GSC at all, and I beat Floppy, and then I played DPP, and I think Gen 3
Mhm.
RSC as well,
Yeah, I
maybe.
remember that game against Halloween, maybe in the semis.
Halloween.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's
man, I have a
it's one of
great
my favorite
memory.
games.
But yeah, I remember at that point you were start like from an outsider's perspective, my own. Then myself and people like me were thinking, oh well, Worms plays GSC now. That's his thing. We didn't know when you had gotten good at it. We just assumed it was always in your repertoire of being a Pokemon genius. So even if you sucked, then no one else would have been able to tell because back then the past gen metagames were mysteries to most people. Whereas nowadays, everyone who's ever watched a game on Smog Tours has a serious opinion on GSC Golem's viability. But back then it was like, wait, is Zapdos good in this tier? I can't tell. Stuff like that. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so then you got into GSC, and then you took a hiatus for a couple of years. I remember the dark ages of League of Legends. So,
Yep.
when did you come back, and what happened then?
Um. So I would have come back. I think I've been around, like at least on chats. I don't think I've ever completely abandoned
Mm-hmm.
uh Smogon. I know there was a period there where I wasn't logged very much at all. But I would have still been around, like IRC or Discord or whatever. But yeah, I was pretty inactive in terms of Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I came back for. I would have come back for either SPL or World Cup, probably SPL a few years ago.
Okay.
And
I remember there was a
honestly, I
World
think
Cup where you let off with Tranitar, and it suddenly started getting every second effect under the sun, and people were like, "Yep, Earthworm's back." Um, but that's just my skewed view of it. I think it's on the channel somewhere very far back. And so, ever since then, you've been mostly GSCing it up, uh,
yeah.
and including the lower tiers like UU and NU and Ubers. So, tell us about the GSC other tiers before we move on.
Sorry, I think you cut out a bit.
Oh, tell us about the other GSC tiers and why you enjoy them, and one little tidbit on why each one is special, from UU to NU to Ubers, because they are
Yeah,
fascinating.
I'll try not to get carried away on that.
Sure.
Uh, so I think yeah, Mount Silver was where GSC, UU, and NU. Well, I think it was a mix of Pier and Mount Silver that tiered those tiers. So originally, so GSC, UU, and all right. So to start off, I was like trying to get good at what I considered to be every tier. So that was like a goal of mine. I was trying to get good at every single UU, OU, and Ubers tier.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actively trying to find games in all of those tiers. I have no idea exactly why I was doing that. I think I just wanted to feel like a more complete player or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was already considered one of the best, but then I really looked up to all these old players that had won all these old Smogon tours, like Veteran in Love, and people like Groudon 80.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided that I wanted to. I think I was also a tournament director, so I was trying to promote the old gens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And part of that was trying to play these GSC lower tiers that really I don't think were played much at all.
Not really. I
But
remember
Mount,
asking G80 some questions about GSC UU, and he rattled off a bunch of Pokemon that were good and not much else. It was like Gyarados is good, Magmar is pretty strong, other stuff. So I'm sure they played it back then, but it was like a niche metagame, and it was so far in the past that whatever development it had been long forgotten. And with the lack of resources from back then, that it's not like it would have been kept for posterity. So all that was really left to go on when Sapientia started hosting those GSC UU tours was Nidoqueen's really fucking strong, and take it from there.
yep. So Mount Silver, they tiered stuff, and they held some tournaments there. And
Mm-hmm.
Sapientia also hosted them on Smogon. I
Mm-hmm.
think there were also some German tours on the German forums, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really know much about those.
Yeah.
Uh, so GSC UU, that has Nidoqueen, Scyther, Slowbro, all of those.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, there was also like Victory Bell was more popular.
Yeah. Did you know I actually credit
And
myself for the discovery of Quillfish and GSC UU? I swear. You know why? Because I was playing that tournament and I was like, all right, what's my cloister going to be? I want spikes. And no one else was using spikes. And I just switched Quillfish in every game, and I got him up somehow. I'd leave it in on like Slowbro psychics and stuff like that just because I knew the spike was not going to be contested. And it was awesome. And now Quillfish is everywhere. So go me.
yeah, yeah. And I actually won, I think, the first like GSC UU OU Uber tournament that was held on Mount Silver as well.
Mm-hmm.
So was it? Was that really what it was? I think it was. Yeah.
I don't
Back
remember
then,
much
GSC
about Mount
Ubers.
Silver tournaments except they had a no Snorlax OU once, and M Dragon won, and then used the logs to prove why Snorlax should be an OU because otherwise people just use Blissey. So I don't know if that's accurate, but at this point, who cares? So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
So
so UU's pretty
Ubers.
good. And that was the one that blew my mind when you put together that spreadsheet analyzing the entire metagame. Um,
Oh yeah.
Seems like a nice
I've
meta.
I've done that for several years now.
Mm.
Ugh. It can be a little bit tedious, but
Yeah.
anyway.
Have you guys dealt with what was it, Feraligatr and Raichu? I remember hearing they.
Oh, that's the new NU. So I'll talk about the old NU
Mhm.
quickly first. So that was the Mr. Mime Pikachu one was the one that was originally designed at Mount Silver.
Mhm. Mhm.
But then later on, oh yeah, I won a tournament in that meta.
Yeah,
So
yeah. That was
I
the big
think
one.
that helps.
That was
That has
where
like
the spreadsheet
auxiliary.
came from.
Auxiliary is really good, by the way. It was really underrated.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then people were pointing out that Mr. Mime and Pikachu are actually very much usable and good in UU. And Mr. Mime is like one of the top Pokemon in UU, actually.
Mhm.
And so this was like several years after people had last played NU pretty much because nobody ever played it apart from those tournaments,
Mhm.
at least at that point. So I decided that I'd take the opportunity to re-tier it pretty much
Mhm.
because nobody played it and some other people that I respected supported the idea. So then we came to this Raichu for Alligator metagame, and honestly, I don't really enjoy it as much as the old NU. The
Mhm.
old NU had like really broken Mr. Mime. Nothing switches into it if it has the right move, and there's only like two different coverage moves that matter on it. So
But Raichu and
uh,
Feraligatr are also kind of not
yeah.
fun.
So what I've kind of discovered is something that makes these metagames much more interesting and bearable is like if the top Pokemon in the metagame can beat itself.
Mhm.
So you look at you got Nidoqueen, which obviously two hit KOs itself, can use Lovely Kiss, all that kind of stuff. And you've got Snorlax in OU can obviously overcome itself
Mm-hmm.
in many different ways. But then in NU, we had this Mr. Mime versus Mr. Mime thing, which was kind of not very interesting. And then we also have this Raichu versus Raichu thing in NU now,
Mm-hmm.
which is unbearable because it's just ridiculous speed ties and rest talk.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrible.
Doesn't
Uh,
sound fun.
so hopefully we can fix that. And for Alligator, didn't really solve anything either because it just walls itself forever.
That's bad. What about Ubers? That's been the latest project I've noticed going around.
Yes, indeed. I've been trying to promote that tier a lot. It's actually like I think it was seriously underdeveloped. There was attempts to develop it before, and we had people like Mr. 378 and ISA playing it before,
Mm-hmm.
but it never really took off anywhere. And I think there's a lot of room for exploration to happen there.
Right.
And with the recent developments, I think that's really happened.
Stuff
So
like Toxic Mewtwo.
Toxic Mewtwo, yeah, that's a majorly important Pokemon in the metagame,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, I've been
a lot
hearing
of
people newly say that Mewtwo is the best. Guys like Blight and Asta and others. And and then some others say that no, it's still Snorlax. You can't go without Snorlax. So, what's the definitive statement there?
yeah, I think you can go without in Ubers. I think you can legitimately go without Snorlax.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be a bit of a controversial statement in GSC,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's a plausible option to go without Snorlax.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not really plausible in OU.
Mm-hmm.
You're
No, you
really
shouldn't.
pushing it if you do that.
I mean, maybe if you're running one of those super brutal stall teams, and even then, it's just not a good idea. Uh,
In Ubers, you can have legitimate reasons for dropping it. Like
mm,
there's Pokemon like Growth Jolteon, which is a lot more viable in the tier because you got Pokemon like Lugia,
mm-hmm.
which very rarely run Earthquake.
Mm-hmm. And
And
it speed ties
Jolteon,
Mewtwo, doesn't it?
it does.
Yeah.
Speed ties, and if it's got +1 at 2 it KOs, so that's
Mm-hmm.
huge. And then Zapdos is also very popular.
Mm-hmm.
Celebi doesn't hurt it that much, and if you've got HP Ice, then you seriously threaten it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of so Jolteon is really good already as a growth passer, but it can also run rest, and that makes it a viable long-term option to get through an opposing team, like a whole team, by stalling and then bringing in your Jolteon because growth has
So what is
a
it
ton of
like the
TPs.
Uber's Drumlax?
Yeah, so you can use it like a Drumlax to have an eventual win
Mm-hmm.
with your Jolteon.
All right.
Then there's
So before we get into more of that, because otherwise we'll be here all night, so we should probably move on to the next one. So let's
so
rattle off. Sorry.
that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, especially because it's like 1,000,000 for you. So because it's always 1,000,000 in Australia. So what are some of your favorite tournament battles throughout history?
Yeah, so because all of those big important battles that I've won or not all of them, but a lot of them have been like tainted in some way, as I've mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that the ones of mine that are my favorite are typically the ones in like the gimmicky tours, like the random Pokemon tournament,
Mm-hmm.
which is a format I really like. That I don't think it's been played in a while, but it's really good.
Mm-hmm.
The reverse tournament, which is like it really challenges you to think differently to normal Pokemon, but Pokemon is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And other similar tournaments to those, like that. What's that? Liar or something or other?
Liar's Rule, where you get the
Yes,
one
that's
lie or the 3 lies per game.
3 lives per game. That's
Yeah.
it. That has so many interesting mind games in it. Really
Mm-hmm.
those mind games. So I really wish that people would play them more.
Mm. So
Um, particular battles.
Mm-hmm.
There was the battle in the final of the original Reverse tournament against Reach Zero
Mm-hmm.
that I really liked. Uh,
Yeah, I looked through the log earlier. It's incredible stuff like Brine Vaporeon, and just do as
yeah,
little damage as possible. And obviously,
yeah,
you have a bunch of rules to make sure that you actually have to do damage and stuff like that. But yeah,
yeah.
um,
It's just so. I find this kind of ties into the other question that you
mm-hmm.
had about skills that I value.
Mm-hmm.
So I really, really value people's ability to come up with the best strategies in these alternative formats.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that might be unique to me because a lot of people don't care about these formats.
Yeah, I
But
think
I
that
really
is
think that
something very specific to you because most people, when they think of unofficial tours that are their favorites, they're like the more prestigious ones like Smogon Superstars or this tournament is kind of a big deal, and Fuck Dragon and other ones like that have kind of had an impact on the landscape in some way, shape, or form. But you like the niche gimmicky stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
especially the ones that make you really think
Mm-hmm.
about what strategies
Yeah, I
could
see this
work.
nowadays in the Ruins of Alf room on Showdown. And then you're always saying, "Let's play GSC Ubers inverse blitz," and I'm just like, well, I guess blitz was a stupid example because you don't really have time to think about that. But yeah, just stuff that's never been played before. Like on PO, then I remember someone made the first GSC Ubers triples war story, and I don't even know if you can play
What?
triples on Showdown actually, but
Yeah, I'm, I'm
that's
interested
not
in that.
something we need to have implemented. But yeah, all right, moving on.
What do you think
So,
of that?
who are some of your favorite players throughout history? So, any tier, because you've been around and a part of quite a few.
Yes, so I have a lot of people that I want to mention here. So from early days like 2008, 2009, the Husk, Loki, Goki, Mop, and Maniac.
Maniacally racist. Yeah.
Maniacally racist. Yeah,
What a
those
great name.
those guys, I had a ton of respect for them, and I think they were all really talented at the game.
Hmm.
So I think those are my favorites from that. Well, I can't say that Mop is one of my favorite players. We had a lot of disagreements, but I can say he's one of my favorite players. But
Not so much
anyway,
users, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah, a lot of tournament stuff going on there. But yeah, I think that's a popular but fair assessment of Mop, the character.
mm-hmm.
Mm.
Is he anyway?
Kind of, he just
Uh,
kind of like shows up and plays like RU sometimes, but you know, nothing much beyond that. Oh, he actually
and
played
then
DPP in this past SPL. That made for some interesting
wow,
games and sites.
I can't believe he's still around. I think he must be older than me. Uh,
I mean, Hog's older than you by a long shot. Well, I guess he took a break, but yeah,
hmm.
we've been around for a
Really, how,
while.
how old is Hog?
He's like 33, 34.
Oh, okay.
But you know, he took a break. You know, for
Mm,
even when you guys like you and Mop haven't been around as much, you've still been around
mm.
to some extent.
He's not that much older than me in the yeah. Anyway, so next up is the Oceania teammates from
Hmm.
back when we won three straight. That was like especially Panamax's Hitmonlee, the Chaser, and uh, Babidi. Babidi?
Heist, Babidi,
Heist?
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Those guys.
Oceania was the original. Well, I guess to me, Oceania was the original superstar team. I'm sure people who saw Asia back in their day thought similar about their lineup, which, in fairness, was ridiculous with guys like G80 and Goofball and Mop, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. But yeah,
Oh yeah,
Oceania,
yeah.
it was people used to complain like they complain about East for so long because Earthworm, Pana, Heist, and that's just the beginning. So people thought that was unfair. So it's a
Yeah,
pretty brutal
that's
team.
kind of ridiculous looking back at it
Yeah.
now that East has come along.
Yeah, those are the days.
Um, and then another one for his constant challenging of my reign of over the unofficial tournaments was Reach Zero.
Really?
He was definitely a rival for me back then. We met in like so many finals. It was crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I didn't expect that name to come up.
yeah. So I respect him for all of his equally fervent dedication to the unofficial tournament scene.
Mm-hmm.
That was around like 2010. Uh, and then for players that were around for around like when SPL was first starting, a couple of them that I really really respected were Spies and Groudon 80.
Mm-hmm.
They were just like unstoppable seemingly in pretty much everything they touched.
Mm-hmm.
Especially Spies in RBY. Like he just always won.
RBY dominance is
Groudon
a
80
funny
in
thing,
GSC as
isn't it?
well.
Because I mean, some people hate that tier so much because of all the variants, but
Yeah,
then you have those. I was gonna say, the Marcos and Alexes and P's and all those other guys.
yeah,
But who just dominated, and like you said, Spies, and I'm sure there were guys before that like Hitmon Lee or something, or someone,
yeah.
and it's just kind of like,
Completely
yeah, it
crazy.
can be dumb, but I recently had the idea, and I think some other people do too. The tier is only as good as its players, so
Yeah,
I think that's probably fair.
yep. And again, I have to credit Borat.
Mm-hmm.
Not really so much because of his play, but for all of his dedication to GSC over that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I guess I can say he's one of my favorite players because of that, or he was. I wish he didn't like
If he
disappear.
he didn't play very much that we
Yeah.
actually have a record of, so.
And then from the period in the 2000 early 2010 mid 2010s, uh, I really like CL and McMegan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they they build their own teams a lot. They come up with their own ideas, and they've done ridiculously well in so many tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
Another guy, Tamahum, his consistency in the new like DPP, something I really respect, and he's also pretty good at like the other old gen tiers.
Mm-hmm.
Over that period, he was really good. And you, am I allowed to say you?
Don't drag it out, but yeah.
Yeah,
Man,
you've
14-year-old me is going crazy somewhere.
of course you've proven yourself to be one of the best players of all time repeatedly. And
I'm glad
then
someone thinks it.
nowadays,
Sorry. Yeah.
nowadays, my main focus is GSC, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of players that I respect GSC now. Something that occurred to me recently when M Dragon put his massive archive thread
Yeah.
is just how much of the history of competitive GSC occurred like recently.
Yeah,
Like
I know what you
after.
mean. Well, it's because it's more of an exposed tier now. Exposed might
Yeah.
not be the best word, but more. It's got more exposure, I guess.
Back when
So
it was current gen, there's no way that it was played as much as it's been
Yeah,
played
yeah.
competitively nowadays.
I mean,
I
you had
feel
like
like
your advancements, but they happened, pretty far. The time periods between advancements were pretty notable, right? Like from what I've gleaned of Borat's writings, then it was like early stuff like Vil and the other foundational players he didn't name as frequently,
see,
with stuff like Celebi and the Encore Raichu team, which sounds super cool. But and then you've got like the basics of how to beat a Curse-Lax, but stuff like that. And then you've got from my understanding, it's like the original super stally points with like Miltank being top 10 in usage, to then Borat booming everything and Vaporeon going crazy, to then that becoming much of the metagame. Either that or the regular 700 turn Stall Wars that make people want to put a turn restriction on the tier every other SPL season or every SPL season. And then, the smaller stuff I think has developed a lot more recently. The Golem and Jinx invasion.
yeah,
Jinx especially going from gimmick to standard has
yeah,
been especially meteoric. But I think Golem is another big one.
yeah. I even recall back then Borat was telling me about Jinx.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if you're mentioning the same set. I
Um,
think he might
it
have.
it's possible, but I just remember him saying stuff like, "If my Vaporeon team becomes popular, then the metagame changes and stuff like Tentacruel, Charizard, and Jinx becomes a lot better."
Yeah.
So and then so much of the metagame is offense, and Jinx is a lot easier to use than Charizard or Tentacruel, so it becomes standard to the point where like whereas before, let's use the example of the most standard of the standard metagame being GSC Cup with some guy who doesn't really know the tier. The team they would use with like a basic understanding of the tier goes from Zapdos, Snorlax, Cloyster, Exeggutor, Steelix, Filler, Machamp, or Vaporeon, to now Jinx is on those standard teams the people who don't really get the tier use. So
Yeah.
that's a pretty big rise. I think Golem is a
Jinx is
better overall Pokemon, but I think it's also not as instantly alluring to use because Jinx has that super attractive, oh, you 6-0 Zapdos Exeggutor kind of potential. So people think, oh, this will get me the easy wins.
yeah. I think Jinx is like it's finally like making some of these older teams that have just been consistent for so long. It actually the matchup is becoming harder to overcome with those now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Something that I don't think was really happening for a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy because another spoiler alert in my quest to put together a panel for every generation that, of course, GSC is at the top of my list to find something for. Just got to fill it out somehow. Maybe get Conflict back from the dead. And, of course, Earthworm would be on it if he wants to, as well as whoever else. But something I wanted to mention was... Sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
That's right.
What were we just talking about besides Jinx? It was just Jinx. Damn it. Oh, no. I remember. Okay. This is something we discussed more in depth on that panel, but people don't even use the best Jinx set, which is Nightmare. Sub just makes the matchups nicer, but Nightmare is just good against every team because every team runs a rest user, and those that don't obviously get messed up by sleep. So, if you really want to mess up teams with Jinx, then you run Nightmare on it, and suddenly you don't get blanked by a random stupid Vaporeon and hope you get a bunch of Psychic drops and Ice Beam freezes. I know that's how some people, like Lavos, like to use Jinx. It's like, you know what, just give me the sub and I'll get every secondary effect under the sun. But Nightmare makes it consistent. You don't lose to Vap, you don't lose to Suicune, you don't lose to Umbreon, for God's sake, and you don't lose to random, Curse-Lax who's avoiding your secondary effects because they're 10%, not 30. So, yeah, Nightmare Jinx is good. And
I gotta say, I'm in the sub I'm on the sub side of things, to be honest.
I just can't
Like,
understand
I know
it. It's
that.
every time I ask someone to defend sub, it's you can just beat it with a psychic drop, and it's like we're not talking about RBY here. It doesn't even have that much PP. 16 and 16 is not a lot of PP.
It's not. It can be a problem, but sub, it's just uh so good with Lovely Kiss because you they just a lot of the time you can't just sack something.
Yeah.
It's just it's a major problem for a lot of teams.
I mean, I guess, but I feel like if Jinx is gonna beat something, it's gonna beat it irregardless of sub most of the time. I get it, guards against booms and stuff, but if they have to like resort to Steelix exploding on Jinx or something, then you're probably already dominating them. And Nightmare lets you get to that point in the first place because everyone's got Snorlax, and most of those Snorlax have rest, and yeah, sub just feels gratuitous to me, but that's a topic for another time. As much as I would
Okay.
love to nerd out about that. All right, so let's go on. So let's top things off. Thoughts on the current GSC metagame. So what's the best?
Wait.
Sorry?
I got some more players to talk
Oh,
about.
sorry. Yeah, keep going.
So the GSC players, I like Lava, Sphere, and Conflict because they. I think I've already mentioned about players like Lavos, how he succeeds with all these unusual strategies. That's something that I really enjoy, so I can easily say that he's one of my favorites. Fear, he is similar. He's very willing to use very risky strategies, like seemingly, but he has such ridiculously consistent results with them. Conflict for his innovation as well. Uh, Other players that I've gained a lot of respect for recently include Asta. He's really good at Gen 3, but then he also like beats me randomly in Gen 2 in tournaments, and he wins. Like he won the recent tournament that I ran in GSC Ubers, which was really shocking to me. And he was using like his own unique strategies as well. So that's really impressive. And ABR as well, similar thing. He just seems to be able to succeed in whatever metagame he touches.
All right.
Then there's... Sorry?
Oh, is that everyone?
No, I still have some more.
All right, keep going.
Jorgen, I have to mention Jorgen because his like seemingly encyclopedic knowledge of every Pokemon in GSC and what's good on them, how they work. I want to mention FOMG, Century Express, and HSA because their skills in the lower tiers. And the Linear Curve is another player I wanted to mention because I've played him in both Gen 3 and Gen 2 when he's been on my teams in team tournaments, and he just has a ridiculous game sense. Like I think he might have the best game sense of any player that I've ever played against. I really have no idea how he does that. He makes
It must be the
moves
chess
that
training, I think.
yeah, but no, I don't see how that would. He just
Who knows? Some of those chess guys are
takes-
real freaks.
he seems to take these risks that look really risky, but they maybe aren't because of.
No, I know exactly what you mean. Like, I remember at a game against him where I had my Celebi out on his Swampert, and it was Calm Mind Pass, and he just stayed in with Swampert and roared. And
Yeah.
and he had a Blissey, and some people, and he could justify it. Pert lives. Celebi's only a threat if it Calm Mind passes. Swampert's useless against the special offense team. I can't let him get his stuff going. Yada yada yada. I'm not saying it was always the right move there, but so it's the stuff that you can't really consider. So
Yeah, I also tested it with him in GSC and some of the team tournaments recently, and he'd never really played it before,
Mm.
and he was playing with these random teams that I just paste pinned for him, and he he seems to have like uh I don't know, I he just has like a unique way of playing.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah,
Mm.
so those are the main players that I wanted to mention there.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's get to those thoughts on the current GSC metagame. So, what's best? What's overrated? What should people not be using? And what's underrated? What should people be using? Now, I recognize that in such an old metagame as GSC, this isn't not just old, but also small metagame. It's like, well, use less Skarmory and use more Heracross or something. But I'm trusting you to come up with something interesting here.
Oh, something. mm, Well,
Well, so rather than best Pokemon, so we don't just say Snorlax and Cloyster and Zapdos, then what specific sets or cores or strategies do you think are most effective in the metagame right now? Other than Zapdos spikes, like let's say Boom
right.
Snorlax is really common because it makes sure that something gets taken down. For example's
Hmm.
sake.
So I think I'm going to refer to the viability ranking update that we did this year. So in that, I think the Pokemon that really should have probably gone up because of their effectiveness in the metagame right now are the Nidoking and Gengar teams. So I think they've really risen above their alternatives
Mm-hmm.
recently.
No, I
Like
agree
partly,
entirely. Yeah.
yeah, partly because of even more increased emphasis on spikes
Mm-hmm.
than before. So there's a ton of that with Golem, obviously. Like that's another rapid spinner that's just come out of nowhere and seems to be very common now in the SPL games and World Cup games and stuff now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Classic finals had
Nidoking,
a golem on golem action.
yeah, right. Nidoking, um, I think it's really showing how good it is in comparison to the other Pokemon that are competing for that slot, which is usually like a Porygon, Machamp,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe like Tentacruel and stuff as the like wall breaker kind of slot,
Yeah.
other than essentially
It's got a lot of really good
Snorlax.
defensive utility, and it's really good at putting pressure on defensive teams.
Yeah, so it has like just enough uh, on the special attacking and physical attacking side to hit like everything
Mm-hmm.
almost. This very I don't know if there's a reliable way to counter it. Is there?
Well, do you mean just by virtue of how it can play, or including its
I guess
move pool
there's
too? Because I was going to mention its move pool is actually really, really good.
yeah. So I guess you can say that Heracross counters it,
Yeah, and
maybe.
then it pops Fire Blast, which also gets Fortress. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's hard. I mean, but even if it only had the one set, the Lovely Kiss, Earthquake, Ice Beam, EQ, then it's still really dangerous with those spikes down.
yes, definitely.
And
And
Gengar complements it because it keeps those spikes and it prevents Cloyster from blowing something up because Cloyster's boom is so effective at getting something, and Gengar is one of
yeah,
the few Pokemon that just completely takes that away from it and puts the opponent on the back foot. And together they covered your Rogue Machamp, so your Snorlax is well protected, and yeah,
yeah.
they're really really strong together. So I
Gengar just
agree
covers
entirely. And they've got
so
so many
much.
ways of just messing with the opponent. Thief, and I like Roar Nidoking personally, and
Whoa.
all sorts of fun stuff. I even feel
Yeah.
like Nidoking with just Ice Beam has been putting more pressure on Zapdos recently. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just a shift in playing, but um,
Yeah. So another thing with Nidoking is that it's good. It's not good, but it's solid against Zapdos. Like
yes, yeah.
out of the other Pokemon that could be considered for that slot, they no, that didn't really have much utility against Zapdos. Machamp, you can say, yeah, it might get past Zapdos because people will send in their Zapdos to handle Machamp
Hmm.
sometimes, especially with Eggy on the decline.
Hmm.
But uh, it can't like switch into Thunder like Nidoking can as a pivot.
Hmm.
That's pretty significant utility that you're getting out of that. And like you said as well, Gengar, Blank Cloyster, when Cloyster is very close to like it's almost S tier now.
Yeah, just
Never
everywhere.
been that high before,
Yeah.
higher than ever.
Hmm.
And Gengar is like the one top tier Pokemon that isn't afraid of Surf or Explosion so much.
I also like that Nidoking's ground typing means that your normal resist phaser, it can be Tyranitar, and you're still not losing to electrics.
Yeah, it's got quite a unique niche there.
Yeah, and
Niche.
it just enables so much. So I like a lot of stuff there.
Some other Pokemon other than Golem and Jinx, which are
The obvious
pretty well
candidates.
documented at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
There's Rest Talk 2 Attack Lax. That's definitely getting bigger.
Do you think it's a good set, or do you think it's overrated?
Oh, I think it's a good set.
Mm.
I think it's it's I think it's kind of overdue because uh, Snorlax it kind of it's getting like it's been targeted for since forever, but there were a lot of teams that mm,
So I
they
remember
used
I
to
was
more
playing.
handle it quite as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was playing FOMG, and he had this double-edged Thunder Rest Talk Snorlax, and this is a long time ago. This is like coming up on 2 years ago now, and
Mm,
I was just like, What the hell is that? That's dumb." But then I like it on a double-edged Earthquake, I think, because of all boom offense that doesn't like Earthquake Snorlax so much. But as soon as you use Curse Earthquake, yeah, it's a threat, and then you get forced to rest, and then you're always in the back foot. So it's kind of having your cake and eating it too. Kind of. I guess it's just more for security against Jinx and Nidoking and even Gengar. So
yeah,
yeah, I mean
those are
I
the
I
teams.
kind of think you might need. Sorry, I'll let you get there in a sec. But I kind of think you need Earthquake because struggling against Gengar is just it's silly. I think and. Actually being able to threaten Tyranitar is pretty awesome. So
Yeah, well, you can kind of threaten it with like even Thunder kind of threatens
Thunder,
Tyranitar.
I think is fair too because you ruin it with paralysis. But just like dinking away with Surf or Flamethrower seems. I've tried it. It's not a great feeling.
Mm. Yep, I can agree with you there. So I think if you're willing to, like, I think it's okay to put Snorlax into that role.
Hmm.
Like, it's not going to completely cost you the game
Yeah,
against.
so like it doesn't need to be all or providing like a big part of your offense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially given how scary stuff like Nidoking and Gengar together are. So you can let it
Yeah.
play that backbone role.
It's highly justifiable these days.
Hmm. Hmm. All right.
Yeah.
Anything? Oh, sorry.
Other things I've noticed. There's that Quagsire team that like McMegan has been using a lot.
Hmm.
That I've noticed is I think that team is really effective in the meta. I was having trouble like identifying exactly why it was working so well because like I feel like there's been similar teams for that have like failed to get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that team, it just seems to be doing well. Um,
How much of that do you attribute to McMegan using it as opposed to just the team, though? Because I admit Quagsire, I'm interested. It does something nothing else can do, but at the same time, like the team itself, I have some questions. I think
yeah.
Starmie Quagsire is just begging for a terrible time.
Mm, I think there's several teams in the meta right now trending towards that, like uh, the rapid spin side of things
No,
over the
yeah, we've
spike
been
side.
seeing a lot of Starmie, I've noticed.
We've been seeing that the Fortress Stormy team
Mm-hmm.
that was huge in SPL. Like so many people use that,
No,
and
that's a
people are
good
still
team. I
using it
like
now.
that, but that's because it actually has spikes to dish out damage itself. I'm talking more like no spikes, just Starmie kinds of teams, which
Yep.
I think they have their place, but with
So
Quagsire already making your life difficult against a bunch of really common, really dangerous stuff, then I don't know.
like,
Maybe it's not a. Maybe I'm not giving it its fair shake here.
yeah. Well, it's been successful anyways.
Yeah,
And there's also
can't argue with that.
the Stormy team I've been using.
With Shuckle,
People have been paying attention. Exactly,
yeah,
that one. Yeah. Rivalries also used that one in something. Not exactly sure what now.
a lot of
But
things. The sub Starmie, I think that was who came up with that? Was that Zakuru?
I'm not sure. I don't know if it was the crew. I encountered it on the ladder first, and then
Because I
I found it
remember,
really challenging to handle. So I
yeah,
adopted it
yeah, I
for
remember.
my
I
team
had
first.
I had the idea. I don't know when, but this is making me sound like a glory hog. But I remember I thought at some point, wow, sub might be pretty good on this thing, and then I faced it. I was like, wow, it's very good. So I think that's. I'm interested to see that become more a part of the metagame, because I think Starmie does have a lot of moves it wants to be running, but
Yes,
sub
absolutely.
fits in pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovis, when he used that team, he changed a bunch of the sets,
Hmm.
and he would have lost. Like I think the odds were against him to win the game that he used, but I think he like took 20 or something crits, non crits from a curse lax
Hmm.
with his Shaco, and that just won him the game.
Yeah, I
Uh,
gotta investigate Shuckle.
Shaco, yeah, you got it. You absolutely have to use it on a really, really defensive
Hmm.
lineup.
But you think it's worth it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's unique. I don't
Hmm.
think there's any other Pokemon that does what it does.
Hmm.
Like it just totally blanks almost all of the Snorlax sets
Hmm.
people use.
Well, who knows? Maybe Shuckle's the next big thing. All right. Anything overrated, and then we'll wrap up.
Overrated. Hmm.
Sub Jinx. Just throwing it out there.
No, not Subjinx. Subjinx is Satan.
Mm.
Um, Overrated. I don't think there is much that's overrated, to be honest.
Hmm.
Actually, now that you mention it, I think that team with the Fortress and Starmie is kind of overrated. I don't like the Fortress Starmie Umbreon
Yeah.
vibe.
Do you prefer Tyranitar over Umbreon, or?
I prefer the Shuckle team.
Well, that's not quite what I expected. One worm for another. But yeah, I get that. Chilio tells me that a lot because I like using that team sometimes. And
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think I'm just not a fan of Umbreon in general.
Yeah, not a fan.
No, I just I don't think I could be doing much wrong with it. I just lose to crits every time I use it.
Mm.
I think it's just a crit prone Pokemon.
Praising the Miltank Quagsire team and then dissing Umbreon. I don't know how I feel about that. Because
Yeah, it's
Umbreon is
different.
so nasty. Because with rest, first of all, I think you have to use Rest Talk Charm Pursuit. Because as soon as you use Toxic on Umbreon, as awesome as it would be, then you have Moonlight for recovery, and that sucks. And if you're using Rest, then you're using Naked Rest, and that sucks. I mean, it's not a Skarmory.
Yeah.
And if you're running Heal Bell alongside it, then you better have like 6 Machamp counters.
I guess
Because
you're disregarding mean look here.
oh yeah, Mean Luke Umbreon is also fun. That's I liked M Dragon's team. That kind of threw everyone for a loop when Mean Luke passed with it against Lavos in World Cup.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. And I know Conflict has used similar stuff like Electrics and then Mean Look Pass Umbreon, which is, Force Paras, Force Rest, and then sick Umbreon on them. I'm still trying to figure out a way to abuse both Electrics and Umbreon and Misdreavus. I don't know if that's biting off more than I can chew. But anyway, more GSC nerdery in the future, I swear. All right, since we're getting up there, so I should probably call it. All right, so what can we expect for the future of Earthworm? Are you excited for Generation 8?
I'm actually kind of interested in it because I know a lot of people really don't like that they're restricting the number of Pokemon in the game to a certain subset, but I think it could really do the competitive game a lot of good.
I had the
Potentially.
exact same thought, and then I saw that they're still allowing like 600 Pokemon, so it's not.
What?
Yeah, it's a nice idea until they're allowed.
600?
Yeah, 600. So basically somewhere between Gen 5 and 6. So
Oh,
it's 550, I think, was the figure I last saw. So still a lot. Yeah, I know. I wanted it to be like just new Pokemon, but no. Yeah, who knows? We'll see.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But you'll still be playing the GSC lower tiers. Are we going to see a GSC Little Cup tier in the future, or a tournament rather?
Sorry.
Are we going to see you playing GSC Little Cup in the future?
GSC Little Cup. I've tried that recently.
Fun.
I tried. What do you call it? GSC Little Cup Item Close Ubers or something like that.
Wow. So like Scyther and Chansey and stuff?
Scyther, yes. Scyther's... It was horrible.
Oh, all right.
No,
so
I'm not going to play Little Cup.
Oh, fair enough. All right. Okay, we're going to call it there. So thank you to Earthworm for being on the show. Do you have any last words for the listeners?
Play GSC lower tiers.
Definitely. GSC UU is awesome. I love that tier. All right. Thanks, guys, for listening, and I will catch you next time.